Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Olympus Has Fallen. So, it's kind of funny. Right around the time that this movie came out, there was also like White House Down, and seemingly they were trying to recreate this kind of movie. Like, while this was happening, there was a lot of stuff where like even at some point the government was going in and questioning certain accuracies about things going on with certain films. It was kind of an interesting time, but I think that might have been going on to maybe sell some tickets or to uh, have certain things be put to question and like to kind of notch down to just like, well, like maybe you shouldn't have probably put that in your film because we don't want to seem like it's easier than it really is to take down the White House and so on and so forth. Like there was a while where I like was really hesitant about wanting to put like a review of this out just because of like all of the craziness, rioting, and all kinds of stuff that was just going on lately, and eventually I just wanted to come and go and review this because like this is a real fun action sequenced movie, and really that is to all be the only thing that is to be interesting about it is just like it's really just fascinating, this just massive like people that all eventually decide to overthrow a government building, and people could have certain sides of the sword about it, and that could create all kinds of interesting debates and all kinds of people going through and mentioning how inaccurate this movie possibly is, that eventually there is no way that XYZ thing could happen during this film, and you get the experts that are just kind of like scene through scene talk about this film and talk about the inaccuracy and so on and so forth. That's bound to happen. I also know that Gerard Butler was to eventually go into GQ and talk about his most iconic character moments, and evidently the Has Fallen series was one of those that came up. And Gerard was like, "Yeah, like every once in a while, eventually I have somebody remember one of these movies," and just kind of like he ends up getting like people like asking him about it, or just saying how great it was, and it really just made Gerard Butler feel good about that whole situation, that someone was to have mentioned about this series, and he's like, yeah, like it was great how it really like it just took off the way it did. So with this movie teeing it up, it's basically like the whole entire movie is to be tied around Korean commandos end up going and taking the White House off guard and going and taking over the White House, while the president is to be submerged into this bunker underneath the White House, and how eventually they are to mention weird kind of cerberus codes and all kinds of goofiness and things that are be just like, we had this really crazy action sequence where they kind of go and blow up the very front of this White House, and eventually how like Gerard Butler's character just kind of walks right into the entrance of it, and is to eventually keep a pretty decent defense to eventually when like RPGs and stuff come in and all kinds of stuff, eventually he is to just put a good enough solid defense to eventually kind of weigh out this storm, or eventually Secret Service are dropping like flies supposedly in this film. and anybody who's to start to defend the White House is eventually quickly but surely eventually taken out. So, so yeah, I think that's all that I want to say about this movie in a very cryptic like sense. Because eventually, like, I don't want to give anything away. It's a really interesting thing to eventually see certain kind of, because not every 100% of this movie is all done seemingly from the White House. There's to also be Camp David, the whole event with that. There's to also be the Washington Monument that they end up using, of course, in this film for a interesting action sequence. So with that said, let's go and let's notch this all down and get this out of the way, because it's time to say it's about that customary time again to go into spoilers about this film. Currently, Olympus Has Fallen is technically on Netflix. Not quite sure if any of the other films are to be conveniently in any other places. I just saw that Olympus Has Fallen was on there, so I decided to check it out. I know a lot of people liked this Has Fallen series much more so than just Gerard Butler saying so. But anyways, if people also like White House Down, let me know in the comments below, because it seemed to be the exact same movie that came out around the exact same time. You kind of wonder how, like, we consistently have these movies bizarrely being made at the exact same time. Like, is somebody kind of divulging secrets and just getting paid, like, to be double dipping into just like, hey, so and so company is making this film, so you guys go and make that film, and hey, give me a slice of that pie, so to speak, or give me a big fat check to eventually release all these secrets to you. Um, or maybe you just have a lot of people that are kind of double dipping and working in different companies to eventually just try to make a ton of money at the same time. So, with that said, let's go into the double five time territory. Let's just go into this thing called spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about that time I get to spoil this movie. So, very beginning of it, we have the president at Camp David getting clocked by Mike Banning's character, who is to basically tell the president, like, hey man, like, you're choreographing, like, I know exactly where you're going, like, you're rope doping, like, come on, really get in there, come on. And so the president's like, I'm tired, and Mike's like, yeah, tired, my batukas, like, come on, like, you're the president, come on, like, you shouldn't be getting tired. So eventually, Forbes is to come in with Mike and the president going into blows, just freaking bopping one another. And so the president is to tell Mike, it's like, hey, you shouldn't have been hitting the president. And Mike is like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, here's an uppercut. So Forbes comes in and is to tell him, like, hey, we're going to need you for this meeting, for whatever they were going to at that point in time. So, like, Mike gets dressed and gets ready for this whole get together, and so the first lady is to just kind of be like last minute thinking about whether or not she should wear certain earrings, as if it matters, but she's getting second opinions. Mike is to tell her to wear the smaller ones, but eventually Margaret Asher is to eventually go with her own opinion, even though she's uh, contradicting what the president and what Mike is to say. Connor is playing video games. Eventually, Mike is to kind of turn off the TV because it's like, hey man, you got to go. Like, I'm trying to get you out of trouble here. So eventually, Connor, the president, and the first lady are all going to go off to this, whatever this banquet meeting thing is. So, we have Mike, who's kind of telling everybody where they're going. Mike is to be sitting with Connor, so uh, eventually Mike is telling who is to go where. We also have Forbes, who's to be kind of sitting out at Camp David, and Forbes is talking about, man, how sweet it is that he's just going to go and relax at Camp David. That eventually it'll feel like retirement for him, and so on and so forth. Because we really have Dylan McDermott's character just treated so poorly in this movie. Like the whole movie, they're to talk about like how, like, hey old man, and hey, like, it's like, I'm sorry, I don't think him being that old compared to everyone, I don't get why they kept criticizing him for calling him like the old man and whatever. And like at some point, like Dylan is going and reuniting with Romo later on in this movie, and eventually talking about, like, well, hey, I can still kick your butt. And Romo's like, what? Chess? Checkers? Like what? Like, what can you beat my butt with? So, and I just thought that was so horrible. I was like, freaking Dylan McDermott went on to do like freaking uh American Horror Story after this, and he went on to do a number of things, and just like looking at this movie and how they treat him in this film, like no wonder he eventually became a villain in this movie, because everybody's ragging on him about his freaking age. No wonder. So no wonder. So now we have them going and driving off to eventually make it to wherever they're making or going to. So the president is going over his speech. Margaret is eventually talking to the president, and of course, it seems like he's not listening. So Margaret is just like, well, I think I'm about shaving my head. And so the president is like, well, that's great, dear. And then she realizes that he's not listening. So he's like, hey, like, whatever is going to happen, I'm sure everything's going to go perfectly fine. And so the president is like, well, thank you, honey. And like, let's go and let's re-go over that whole shaving your head bit. She's like, oh, you were listening. He's like, well, of course I was. So all of a sudden there's to be this terrible stormy weather, or not stormy, but like it's snowing pretty hard, and so of course with it probably being very slick out there, which I can't really believe that, because like this is freaking Camp David. You would think they would be like plowing and like putting ice down like a mother at this place, with it being Camp David, and like the president could have to be rushing out there at any minute. Like there would be no lick of ice or snow or whatever in the grounds of these roads with the president being there. So that's my first little bubble of seemingly like my thought process being like, I don't think that this is all that accurate, but meh, whatever. So I think they end up going over a bridge here, and all of a sudden the limo is just kind of like spin out and eventually crash off to the side. And so the limo is now teetering back and forth whether the limo is going to completely fall to its death with the president and the first lady. But I think the limo is to be more of a concern, right? So Mike is to scramble out of his vehicle to eventually make it to the president. Beforehand, Connor was talking about all the exits that are to be at this place they're going to, and like all the other information that these guys were evidently going to feed him, so that way they can be like, yeah, he's definitely going to be becoming a Secret Service guy somewhere down the road. So because they're kind of brooming him up to be that kind of kid that is eventually wanting to become a Secret Service guy, because maybe he probably will in the distant future. So let's go on. So eventually, limo teeter tottering. What's going to happen? Mike scrambles to go to see what's going on with the president. The president is to have a trouble with the first lady's seatbelt, and so they're scrambling to try to get the president out. It seems like the door isn't working on that side of the limo. So eventually, what happens is it seems like this limo is starting to lose control of being on this place that they are on. So eventually, Mike just scrambles, cuts the president's seatbelt, grabs him, and is like, "I'm sorry, President, but you're like, I have to take you." So Mike grabs the president, and after this, the limo ends up falling, crashing to its death, with Ashley Judd in it, Margaret Asher, and so now we have to queue up like 10 months later or X amount of time later, between that event. So uh, Mike Banning is to, of course, be in a different position than being in the Secret Service. He evidently is to be doing some government job where he's kind of pushing pencils and papers and whatever, some other kind of weird, goofy job. So, uh, so Mike is to, of course, wake up to seemingly want to check the news to find out that the White House is to be having some Korean minister come in to eventually kind of talk about things. So Mike is as much as possible like keeping uh, his attention well onto the TV while Lei is kind of talking. His wife is talking about certain things that are going on with her life and her friends and her whatevers. And so Mike is just like, yeah, 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 I've heard everything that you were saying. And she's like, no, you didn't. And then so he ends up having to recall like something about what she said. And she's like, no, no. So we really have like two situations here where like in a couple situation where like somebody has to not be paying attention, and I guess that's the husband. I don't know why they wrote that in there twice for this movie, but I guess that's the only way that they could have written this interaction between a husband and a wife in this film. Weirdly, I don't know why that was. So uh Lei is eventually talking to Mike and saying, like, you know what, like maybe it's about time we go on vacation. And like I'm just thinking, like, man, I've seen so many like couple things where eventually they're talking about vacation. I don't know why this is. So like I ended up watching Heels, where Heels is like the woman is like, we got to go on vacation, and Stephen Amell's like, not now, I have so much going on. I'm so busy. But like the wife is just like, but vacation, and Stephen Amell's like, but not now. I got so much going on. But anyways, so Mike is to mention, it's like, well, hey, how about we have a date tonight? Go to a movie, and you can bring all billion of your friends with you, whichever. So Mike ends up going off to work and is eventually going to go and have lunch with Len Jacobs, who's to be a Secret Service director. Sure. So Mike goes with her to this lunch, and so Mike is wanting a little update on the White House, like, well, hey, is Connor still like giving these guys over at the White House headaches because he's going and like hiding in his secret hiding place? And Lynn Jacobs is like, yeah, yeah, like he's still doing that. So all of a sudden, Roma is to magically appear. One of the guys of Secret Service that Mike used to work with, and so Roma just kind of grabbed a bite and is going to go head off to work with on just kind of uh, with this whole minister thing and keeping him safe, prime minister or Korean minister thing. So Mike is kind of asking Roma, hey, like I'm sure you guys are going and having some the Koreans coming in, right? Like, isn't that great? And so Roma's like, well, yeah, like it's great catching up with you and whatever. And so they end up kind of peeling off, and so Mike is to just be like itching to want to go back to be a Secret Service guy, and Len Jacobs is like, you know what, like really, like we know that you, like everybody knows that you did the right thing, even the president knows that, but every time the president is going to look at you, he's basically going to see his dead wife, sadly. So like, yeah, it's like you're going to be riding the pine for who knows how long. So Mike is to eventually make it back to his office, to all of a sudden here's when things are to go horribly awry. So the president is to eventually usher in the Korean minister with seemingly a bunch of men with them. it seems that Forbes had transitioned on to eventually be working with the Korean minister for whatever goofy reason. So Roma and Forbes are kind of catching up. Roma is just mentioned like, "Hey man, like you old scamp," and it's like God, I like, why is everybody saying that Dylan is so like is old in this movie? He's not that old. Uh, Dylan is to tell, or Forbes is telling Roma that, hey man, like I can still beat you. I can still beat you up. And Roman's like, beat me in what? Chess? Checkers? Come on. So they're just kind of catching up, kind of like trading blows, so to speak, verbal blows. So we go on. So eventually, the president is talking with the Korean minister. And so all of a sudden we end up having this huge, massive plane in the air that's to all of a sudden be invading White House airspace. So all of a sudden we scramble these jets to try to get this big, massive plane out of the air. This big, massive plane goes and shoots up these jets, taking them down. So now the president is to be, as well as the Korean minister, is to be rushed into the elevator bunker that is to be underneath the ground of this White House. So all the defenses are being scrambled together. All the Secret Service people are just kind of like putting their defenses out by the White House to just kind of see like where the heck the threat all is. So Mike, all of a sudden, when seeing this plane and seeing it like kind of blast through all these people, Mike is now like running to the White House to try to see what he can do to like help. And all of a sudden, he has to see these three backpacked guys that look suspicious. Mike is to try to prevent them from going anywhere near this fence, and he ends up shooting two of them, but then one of them ends up going and blowing up the front of this White House fence. So all of a sudden we have these Korean commandos that just kind of come out of the woodwork and start uh, rushing this fence and making their way into the White House. Where we have these Secret Service men that are trying to shoot these guys down, but eventually they make their way through. Mike is scrambling also to try to make it into the opening of this White House, and excuse me, and so. Uh, I'm hoping I'm not saying eventually a lot because I know that's going to happen because there's so much information here. There's a lot of things to just unplug here and just kind of and play with and whatever. So, uh, so eventually there's to be a RPG shot into the White House, which kind of impacts it, and so Mike lets everybody know RPG's coming. So like we see here Secret Service scrambling, getting the president in his bunker, and then they go off trying to uh, gun up all of these Korean commandos. Roma is desperately trying to just kind of take all these guys down, but slowly but surely, a lot of the Secret Service get taken out, which I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't know quite exactly how skilled these people are. It just seems like a lot of randos just take over the White House, and I'm scratching my head thinking like a bunch of just random people. Like it doesn't seem like they're skilled people. It just seems like they're a bunch of randos that just come on in and just like, hey, like I'm here now. Look at me in the Oval Office. Click. Because even Mike just easily makes it into the White House, and he's just sitting in the Oval Office, and eventually going on and getting the satellite phone from the president's safe that he knew where it was. So uh, So the president is to be held in this bunker, and that ends up getting taken over by, we end up finding out later, this guy named Kang. And so now that that's going on, we have the Speaker of the House and a number of like generals, and Lynn Jacobs is to be at this war room, and so everybody's scrambling. And so what ends up happening here is uh, eventually they go and they find a way to take down this plane, and the plane goes and crashes, and crashes and hits the Washington Monument, decimating that. Then it like crashes down next to the Washington Monument. So they're like, okay, so at least we got that. But then all of a sudden we have all these uh, garbage trucks that just blow out their tires and just stay there, and have these big huge weaponries custom made into these large uh, garbage trucks, and they're just blasting away at anybody who's to make their way through here, or they blast away at the White House to try to kill off as many Secret Service as they possibly can. So Mike is really their only defense at this point, because everyone's dead. Mike scrambles around and finds just everyone is just dead, annihilated, whatever. And so, if that's not weird, we seem to have a bunch of people that had like all these street clothes that came in there. But then when Mike is to make it into the White House, all of a sudden these people have all this gear on them, which doesn't make sense. I'm like, where were the people in street clothes? Because at some point they kind of like they scramble from different kind of things. Where some people have some real SWAT like armor on them, and some people have street clothes. But I'm like, so which is it? Like, I guess when there's some people that ended up getting in here, like I guess they actually had legitimate like SWAT gear on. Um, so Mike ends up getting the sat phone, um, and it's to call. And so immediately when he calls, because the Speaker of the House is thinking, oh, this is the president? And so Mike is like, negative, it's Mike Banning. So they're like, who the heck is this guy? Like, they're thinking of like his kind of lineage and whatever, and they're like, should we really trust this guy? And so Lynn Jacobs is like, yes, like if he's probably going to be our only defense here, he's a Green Beret and he's military, Marines, and this and that. Like he's like stats up to yin yang. Like he's going to be your guy. Uh, so eventually they're like, okay, we can probably trust him. So it seems that since they have an inside man in the White House, and it seems that they can eventually get back the White House, we have the Speaker of the House that is to try to figure out that he's like, okay, let's go off and like get a Korean expert. Let's go and talk to some of our allies, and let's also do a press conference to let everybody know that we have everything well in hand and we're going to take back the White House. So they go off, they do that. Like the president also rattled off, like, "Hey, give me this coffee, half and half, 2 sugars, whatever." Like, this is gonna be a while. So the president does all the stuff that he rattled off and said. So uh, we also have this general here that is pretty much just uh, General Edward Clegg, who is to consistently want to break into the White House with his men, with his military men, because his men is the best. And so we have this guy who consistently wants to break into the White House with his men, and Mike is just telling him, it's like, well, let me go and let me like survey the lay of the land before you guys come in here, because this guy is to mention how like he has the best men for the job, and it's like, yeah, I'm sure you're really gonna have the best men, but eventually they're gonna get wiped out because that's always what happens when someone tries to sneak into somewhere where they shouldn't. They end up getting easily killed. So Mike has asked the Speaker of the House what his command is to do. Speaker of the House tells Mike that the first order of business to get Connor out of the White House, because it seemed that Kang is to realize about the Cerberus codes, because Kang is to tell the presidents like, well, hey, like we're not even going to care about any of the nuclear weapon codes to like launch any of these rockets. That's going to be wasted time, because the Pentagon will probably have changed all those codes. So now all they care about is the Cerberus codes to take all these nukes and uh, and uh, and self-destruct all of them, which is going to make North America a wasteland of sorts. So, Mike is to go and realize also that these men are looking for Connor because supposedly they have a picture of him. And so, because eventually Connor, while going to getting the stat phone, had to take out one of these Korean commandos. So, uh, eventually Mike goes on is to find two Korean commandos to go and get information from them. So he knocks them out, ties them up, and is to ask them information about like, hey, where, uh, where, like, where have you guys been from? Like, who is your boss? Like, tell me all this information. So these guys start laughing, and so Mike goes and stabs one of them in the neck, and then the next guy that's still alive, it's like, well, hey, like I really liked your friend there. He was really funny. Like, information. Tell me now. I'm gonna stab you in the thigh, and then just keep twisting this knife until you tell me. So Mike goes back with the Speaker of the House to tell him and rattle off that their villainous characters be king, and that there's certain kind of pictures of certain neck things or kind of behind the ear things that they couldn't even figure out what the heck that even is. So uh, all of a sudden we have one guy who's to rattle off all this information about Kang, who's to say that he is some war criminal, Ray Monroe, who's to mention like rattling off all this war crime stuff that this guy has committed, and weirdly this guy had been hiding out in plain sight, and how nobody had figured out that this guy was even here makes no rational sense. And it's like, well, the government couldn't even, like, our own government couldn't have figured out who this guy was, which just seems kind of goofy, because they didn't even know who this guy was. They should have known it within 5 seconds of seeing this guy's face, but to each their own. So, uh, eventually, what happens when Kang is to first have contact with the Speaker of the House, he ends up taking the Korean minister and blowing his head off. And so it seems like these people aren't negotiating for anything. They're basically just eating up time. Uh, Eventually, when the Speaker of the House does something horribly wrong, uh, and eventually the villains get aggravated, they end up shooting somebody in front of this TV screen. They end up eventually shooting the vice president, killing him because evidently the vice president was with the president. at this bunker. So he ends up getting killed also. So now they're going to go with these Cerberus codes, trying to get these codes. So there seems to be some general that is to be first kind of held and put a knife to his throat. President is to tell the guy to just give up the code because they supposedly won't get his code. I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't feel like any of these people would be of giving up any of these codes. And basically, it's like, well, what are you going to do if we don't give you the codes? Are you going to kill us? Because we're not going to give up the codes. So the first guy ends up giving up the code. And then so Ruth is next up to have to give up this code. Ruth McMillan. Ruth eventually is to tell these people, hey, like, you're gonna have to kill me to give up this code. So eventually they just start beating her up and smacking her around. I'm just like, God, that's so horrible. But we still have like Ruth, who's to have this funny moment with the president, kind of mentioning like, hey, how's my hair? Like after she's technically gotten beaten up and all kinds of things, there's still this kind of comedic moment between the two of them. And he's like, not a hair out of place. The president is. So, uh, and eventually the president is to kind of have a moment where he rethinks his presidency while talking to this girl. Uh, we also have Kang, who's to mention that like they like took over the White House within 13 minutes before uh, like the military force come in and try to take down uh, the White House. So eventually, Mike is to supposedly take out the surveillance footage, and so now Kane goes through archive footage to find out who is to be the kind of savior of this whole White House. So Forbes is to see who this guy is and is to spot the fact that it's like, oh yeah, that's Mike Banning. So eventually Mike is to go and contact Kang and start to tell him, it's like, well, hey man, like I've killed a lot of your guys, like you better start doing a head count. And Kang is like, oh hey yeah, like I know you, Mike Banning, and your wife, and starts rattling off where she is, and Mike is just like, oh, how about you go and F off? so, uh, so Mike is to now have to go and do the mission where he's to go and find Connor. So, it seems that Mike does know where Connor's secret hidey ho is, secret little place. And it seems that Kang is to also figure out that there is certain number of secret walls that are to have been put together in the White House. So he's kind of figuring out that maybe Connor is hiding out in secret walls. So, because evidently they have blueprints of the White House. So Mike goes where Connor is, and eventually the Korean commandos make their way to kind of figuring out if they can hear either Mike or Connor. And so it seems that they can. So the Korean commandos start blasting through the walls, hearing where Mike and Connor are. Mike and Connor scramble to make it out of this secret room to eventually have Connor go and like kind of push against this this little spot that looks like a chimney, but it's not a chimney for whatever goofy weird reason. So Connor makes it out is to kind of hobble his way or kind of climb his way out of this spot. Mike has one commando guy that he's to deal with and snap his neck. and to tell Connor to get the heck out of there. So Mike is to tell everybody, hey, like Sparkplug is coming. Go ahead and just get to him so I can go and do the rest of my mission. So eventually they start releasing people at some point uh, to kind of flush out Mike. Uh, so they end up putting out Ruth McMullen, and so Mike is to kind of see Kang there with a bunch of his guys. So Mike has a shooting match uh, with Kang, and so Kang retreats back to the bunker. Mike starts wiping out all these guys. Uh, so McMullen goes off to uh, be taken by the SEAL team. So Mike is talking to the Speaker of the House, and they want to go and try to put a SEAL team and try to go to the ceiling of the White House, or the ceiling, the roof of the White House. They're wanting to take some SEAL teams and try to get into the White House by going into the roof. So, uh, so they try that and they horrifically fail because Mike is going to try to do some reconnaissance to try and see if this place is safe for them to land, which it isn't, because all of a sudden they, I guess, had figured out that there's this big, huge, massive gun-like weapon that can be like unleashed to go and like take out all these helicopters, and so Mike tries to abort that thing going out there to go and attack these people, but there's nothing he can do. So Mike is telling these guys, like, dude, freaking, like, get out of here, like, abort this mission. You guys aren't going to make it. So this machine thing just starts popping off, and they try to think that they can take it down, but it's not working. Mike has to go and find this bazooka to take this thing down, and so he does. But a helicopter ends up crashing into the White House, almost killing Mike in the process. And so this general has the balls to just tell Mike, hey, Mike, maybe you should just stand down because it seems like you're creating a lot of problems for us. And Mike is like, I'm sorry, but I don't answer to you. Like, really, Mike shouldn't be answering to anybody right now because, like, Mike should be able to do whatever the F he wants. Really. So the Speaker of the House has to go and tell Mike about the Cerberus codes because certain codes are starting to become active. And Mike is like, well, what's Cerberus? And so they're like, well, you're not actually qualified to know this information. And Mike is like, I don't care if I'm qualified or not. I should know because I'm here. I'm your last defense. So get to cracking. Like, tell me this information. So the Speaker of the House lets him know what this thing is, and so he's like, okay, great. They have to, like, layman terms tell him what it actually is. I'm like, shouldn't they have done that anyways? Shouldn't they have told him, like, the layman terms version of it? Because it's like, I'm sorry, this guy doesn't have a lot of time. He might have to go into killing people at any moment. So, like, you guys are just kind of, like, give him the short and the skinny of it all. So, after all that, so now Kang is to send Forbes out because Forbes is there still working for Kang now, and we had the president at one point like just so furious at Forbes, like, oh my God, you turned your back on this country. And so Forbes is like, well, so did you. Like, you tried to reap the benefits of like all these like Wall Streets and all these other things, just like buy your way into the presidency. And so King is to tell Forbes is like, well, hey, like, seemingly be his ally and like go after him and kill him. So Forbes is kind of going out there like Clay from Die Hard when eventually Hans is to seemingly have an American accent and he goes out to Bruce Willis to just be like, hey yo, I was trying to get a way out of here and the roof and and so Mike is talking to Forbes and like he's like really scared and and all this stuff. Like Forbes just kind of mentioning, man, this guy, this is really getting me spooked. And Mike's like, well, like, you okay? Like, you okay there, buddy? Like, you hurt? So Forbes is to accidentally mention Kang's name, and Mike is like, well, how do you know what his name is? And then Forbes is like, well, here's the story, and then he starts like beating the crap out of him, and so they end up like fighting it out. But eventually, Mike gets the upper hand on Forbes, sadly, and so Mike is just telling Forbes like, man, you just like what happened to you? And Forbes is like, man, I just lost my way. So Mike is just like, well, hey, like tell Kang that I'm dead, so that way I can kind of sneak in and catch him off guard. So Mike, after Forbes does this, stabs him and kills him, sadly. So Mike goes off. So they eventually start releasing a lot of the hostages all at once, with all like head to toe like black cloths covering everything. So they send a bunch of these characters out onto this chopper, and then they detonate some explosion and kill everyone off in this helicopter. And so now they're thinking like, oh my god, like Kang's dead, the president's dead, everyone's dead. What happened here? And Mike is like, no, that's not what really happened. Like, I think the president and Kang are still down in this bunker, and so I'm going to have to go sneak in there and try to take care of this. But before Mike goes, he calls Lei and is to like tell her like, hey, like I'm really busy here. I'm really slammed today. And Lei's like, yeah, me too. Like I'm really busy. Just, like they have this common conversation with one another. Where Mike is like, yeah, I'm still getting ready for that date tonight. Like, yeah, me too. Uh, so Mike uh, goes into the bunker and takes down all of Kang's men, as well as the president is trying to take down Kang and try to grab the gun, but eventually the president gets shot and falls over. So now Mike ends up having to like haggle with Kane, gets him into an armbar and stabs him into the head with this knife. But Cerberus is active, and so Mike has to scramble to go and unactivate this whole Cerberus code. So he's calling the Speaker of the House and like, hey, like, give me the deactivation code. So now they start rattling all these numbers and like semicolons and stupid symbols and all this goofy thing. And Mike is like, you guys freaking serious right now? Like, hashtags and all this garbage. Like, what the are you putting all these codes in for? And so he fills up the whole thing, and he's like, "Is that it? Is that all I have to do?" And so they're like, "Yeah." And there's like 3 seconds left, and the timer stops. And he's like, "Oh yeah, we did it!" Like, yeah. So, um, both Mike and the president are to just walk their way out of the White House. And so Mike is telling the president, it's like, "Hey man, I'm sorry about all the stuff that they did to the White House." And the president turns to Mike and he's like, "I'm sure it's insured." And so they walk off, and I thought that was like a funny last little comedic bit there. Uh, so the last of it is to have this president do this whole speech where this whole situation gave them a gift to eventually like not have this like get repeated the next time around. And so after the president is to do this whole speech, he eventually shakes the hand of Mike, realizing that Mike is eventually going to be the president's number one guy again, because everyone else is pretty much dead now. So, with that said, I think that's all that ends up happening in this movie. I hopefully covered it. With that, yeah, I'm gonna get the heck out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.